What happens when the person who promised to love you forever becomes the one who tells you you're worthless? This is the story of Elara Vance, a woman whose brilliant mind was locked away by the man she married. Her ex-husband, a titan of Wall Street named Richard Sterling, stood in a sterile courtroom and told her, "Without my name, without my money, you will crawl back here in a year begging for scraps." He laughed as he said it. He thought he had broken her. He thought he had erased her. What he didn't know was that while he was busy slamming doors in her face, she was quietly building a key to a door he could never even imagine. He gave her 1 year to fail. She only needed 1 day to change the world. The air in the conference room of Sterling Roth and Associates was so cold it felt like it was actively stealing the warmth from Elara Vance's skin. It was a manufactured chill, the kind that costs thousands of dollars a month in electricity to maintain, designed to communicate power, efficiency, and a complete lack of sentimentality. It was the perfect setting for the end of her marriage. Across the polished mahogany table, Richard Sterling didn't look at her. He was scrolling through his phone, a dismissive flick of his thumb across the glass screen, the only sign of life. His lawyer, a man with a face like a clenched fist named Arthur Roth, slid a final document across the table. "Just this last page, Mrs. Vance." Arthur said, his voice smooth and condescending. He still called her Mrs. Vance, a final petty twist of the knife. In a few minutes that name would no longer belong to her. Elara's own lawyer, Laura Simmons, a bulldog of a woman who had been her best friend since college, placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You don't have to look at him, Elara. Just sign." But she did look. She looked at Richard, the man she had spent 12 years with. The man she had loved with a fierce, all-consuming passion. The man who had taken her ideas, her ambition, her very sense of self, and molded them into a portfolio of successes he now claimed entirely as his own. He was handsome, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than her first car. To the world, he was Richard Sterling, the venture capital wonderkind, the man with the Midas touch. To her, he was a thief. She remembered their early days huddled in a tiny Palo Alto apartment, dreaming up algorithms on a whiteboard. She was the architect, he was the salesman. Her concepts for predictive market analysis became the foundation of his first multi-million-dollar fund. Her research into neural networks, which she'd abandoned to support his career and raise their 2 children, was the ghost in his machine, the uncredited source of his genius. "Are we done here?" Richard finally spoke, his voice bored as if he were waiting for a barista to finish his latte. He pocketed his phone and looked at her, his blue eyes as cold and empty as the room. "Just waiting on your ex-wife." Arthur smirked. Elara's hand trembled as she picked up the pen. The settlement was a joke. He had tied up all their significant assets in complex corporate structures, leaving her with the heavily mortgaged suburban house he no longer wanted, and a generous alimony that was, in his words, enough to keep you comfortable while you find some little hobby to occupy your time. He was keeping the Manhattan penthouse, the Hamptons beach house, the art collection, and the company she had helped build from the ground up. She pushed the signed paper back across the table. It was done. Laura began packing her briefcase. "We'll be going now." Richard stood up, straightening his tie. He walked around the table, not to leave, but to stand directly in front of Elara, forcing her to look up at him. "You know," he began, his voice low and laced with a cruel sort of pity, "I almost feel sorry for you, Elara." Laura stepped forward. "That's enough, Richard." He ignored her, his eyes locked on Elara. "You're getting this house, this money. You should be grateful. You have no idea what the real world is like. You haven't worked a real job in over a decade. Who is going to hire you? What are you even qualified to do?" The words were designed to hurt each one, a precision-guided missile aimed at her deepest insecurities. He was reminding her that she had given up her PhD candidacy at Stanford for him, that she had turned down a promising research position at Google to be a supportive wife. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Fine, don't fool yourself. All those little projects you tinkered with in your study? They're nothing. Child's play. You have no ambition, no killer instinct. That's why we worked so well together. I had it, and you were happy to just follow." He leaned in closer, his expensive cologne filling her senses, a scent she now associated with lies and betrayal. "Let me make a prediction," he whispered, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "You'll burn through that alimony in 6 months trying to launch some ridiculous half-baked idea. When it fails, and it will fail, you'll see. You'll understand that you're nothing without me. You'll never make it, Elara. And when you're broke and alone, you'll crawl back begging for scraps. I give you 1 year. 1 year until you're at my door." He looked at her, searching for the tears for the breakdown he so clearly craved. But he didn't find it. He found something else. In the depths of Elara's tired, heartbroken eyes, a tiny cold star of anger began to ignite. It was an anger she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years, buried under layers of compromise and accommodation. She stood up, her spine straightening. She was shorter than him, but for the first time in a long time she didn't feel small. "Your prediction is noted, Richard," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a future to build." She turned and walked out of the room, Laura right behind her. She didn't look back. She didn't see the flicker of surprise on Richard's face, the momentary confusion of a puppeteer who has just realized one of his strings has been cut. As the heavy office door clicked shut behind her, Elara Vance took her first breath of truly free air. It was cold, yes, but it was hers. And it was enough to fuel a fire. The heavily mortgaged suburban house felt less like a home and more like a museum of a life that was no longer hers. Every photograph on the wall was a lie, a captured moment of manufactured happiness. Within a week, Elara had packed them all away. She sold the designer furniture, the expensive art Richard had bought to impress his clients, and the luxury SUV. She paid off a chunk of the mortgage and traded the rest for a used Subaru and a war chest. Her new life was lived in 2 rooms, the kitchen and her study. The living room was a ghost town. The master bedroom, a place she couldn't bear to sleep in, was sealed off. She moved into the guest room, a small, impersonal space that felt honest in its emptiness. Her days were a blur of caffeine and code. Richard was right about one thing: she hadn't worked a real job in years. But while he was closing deals and networking at cocktail parties, she had been learning. She'd devoured online courses in machine learning, devoured white papers on AI ethics, and taught herself 3 new programming languages. The ridiculous half-baked idea he had mocked was a project she called Athena. It was an AI-driven adaptive learning platform for children. It wasn't just another educational app. Athena was designed to be a true digital tutor capable of understanding a child's unique learning style, be it visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. It could detect frustration or boredom through patterns in interaction and adjust its methodology in real time. It was designed to help kids who fell through the cracks of the traditional education system, kids like her own son Leo, who struggled with dyslexia. The initial framework for Athena had been her passion project for years. Richard had called it her little hobby, something to keep her busy. He'd occasionally glance at her complex diagrams and say things like, "That's cute, honey. Are you making a video game?" Now her hobby was her lifeline. She called the one person she knew she could trust Ben Carter. Ben was a brilliant, perpetually scruffy programmer she'd known since her Stanford days. He had a wizard-like talent for turning theoretical code into functional, elegant software. While Elara was the architect, Ben was the master builder. He'd taken a job at a mid-level tech firm for the stability, but his heart was in innovation. She met him at a dingy coffee shop in Mountain View, the kind of place that ran on passion and cheap espresso. She laid it all out, the divorce, Richard's parting words, and her plan for Athena. She slid a folder across the sticky table. It contained the core architecture market analysis and a shoestring budget derived from selling her old life. Ben read through it, his expression growing more and more intense. He looked up, his eyes wide. "Elara, this is revolutionary," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "The dynamic learning algorithm, the emotional feedback recognition, it's years ahead of anything on the market." This isn't just an app, it's a paradigm shift. But it's just an idea, Elara said, the doubt Richard had planted still taking root. I have no funding, no company, no connections. Richard made sure of that. He blacklisted me. I've sent out feelers to a few VCs I know. The second they hear my name, the doors close. They're all his friends. Ben leaned forward, pushing the folder back toward her. Then we don't use his doors. We build our own. He tapped the folder. I know some people. Angel investors, not the big sharks. People who are more interested in the tech than in the name on the letterhead. But to get in front of them, we need a working prototype, something they can see, touch, and feel. I have the alimony, she said. It's not much, but it can keep us afloat for a few months. Ben shook his head. No. You use that to live. I'll handle the prototype. He took a deep breath. I'm quitting my job, Elara. I'll cash out my 401k. It's not a fortune, but it's enough for servers, software licenses, and enough pizza to keep us going for 6 months. I believe in this. I believe in you. Tears pricked Elara's eyes, the first genuine, non-sorrowful tears she'd shed in months. Richard had told her she was alone, but she wasn't. The next 6 months were a brutal, exhilarating grind. Her quiet suburban house became the unlikely headquarters of their nascent startup, which they called Praxis AI. The dining room was filled with servers, their fans a constant hum. The kitchen table was their boardroom. They worked 18-hour days fueled by Ben's endless supply of terrible coffee and Elara's unwavering vision. They coded, they debugged, they argued, and they created. Slowly, Athena began to take shape. It was beautiful. Elara tested the alpha version with her son Leo. She watched her heart in her throat as the program detected his frustration with a block of text and seamlessly switched to an interactive auditory exercise. Leo, who usually threw his books in anger, was engaged. He was smiling. He was learning. It was in that moment that Elara knew she had something real. This wasn't a hobby, it was a mission. They secured a few small checks from Ben's angel investor contacts, enough to keep the lights on and hire a junior developer. But it wasn't enough to scale. They were running out of time and money. The rejection letters from the bigger VC firms piled up. Most were polite but firm. A few were more direct. One from a partner at a firm that did regular business with Richard simply said, "We do not see a viable path to market for this product." Elara knew Richard's fingerprints were all over that one. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, with their bank account dwindling and morale at an all-time low, an email landed in Elara's inbox. It was an automated reply, a confirmation that her unsolicited proposal had been received by Aethelred Corporation. Aethelred was the white whale of the tech world, a behemoth run by the enigmatic and legendary CEO Isabella Hayes. They were known for two things: acquiring disruptive technologies and never ever accepting unsolicited proposals. Ben looked over her shoulder. Aethelred? You sent the proposal to Aethelred. That's like putting a message in a bottle and throwing it into the Pacific. I know, Elara sighed. It was a Hail Mary. They forgot about it. 2 weeks later, another email arrived. It wasn't automated. The subject line was simple. Regarding your Athena proposal. It was from the office of Isabella Hayes. They wanted a meeting. The email from Aethelred Corp felt like a glitch in the matrix, a statistical impossibility. Elara had to read it 3 times before the words sank in. It wasn't just a meeting with some mid-level acquisitions manager. The invitation was for a formal presentation to the entire senior executive board, including Isabella Hayes herself. This is it, Ben said, pacing the length of their makeshift server room. This is the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Nobel Prize ceremony all rolled into one. Aethelred doesn't do maybe. They either buy you for $1 billion or they crush you and build their own version. The pressure was immense. They had 2 weeks. 2 weeks to polish their prototype, refine their business plan, and prepare Elara to stand in a room full of sharks and convince them she was a leviathan. Laura Simmons, her lawyer and friend, came over that night with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a mountain of Chinese takeout. She transformed from friend to legal counsel, drilling Elara on corporate governance, intellectual property rights, and potential deal structures. "Don't let them see you as a small fry," Laura advised, pointing at Elara with a chopstick. "You're not a desperate startup founder. You are the chief architect of a revolutionary technology. You are offering them an opportunity, not the other way around. Project strength, even if your knees are shaking." The next 14 days were a crucible. Elara and Ben barely slept. They rehearsed the presentation endlessly. Ben streamlined the demo, making it flawless and visually stunning. Elara memorized every financial projection, every market penetration statistic, every possible answer to every conceivable question. She researched every member of Aethelred's board, learning their backgrounds, their past investments, and their pet projects. She paid special attention to Isabella Hayes. Hayes was an icon, a self-made woman who had shattered glass ceilings in the cutthroat world of enterprise technology. She was known for her razor-sharp intellect, her brutal efficiency, and her uncanny ability to see 10 years into the future. She was also intensely private. Reading about her, Elara felt a strange sense of kinship, a respect for a woman who had clearly fought her way to the top. The day before the presentation, Elara was practicing her opening remarks in front of a mirror when her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Her blood ran cold. She knew who it was. "Heard you got a meeting." "Cute. Don't embarrass yourself." It was Richard. He had his spies everywhere. The VCs, he controlled the lawyers, the bankers. His network was a web of gossip and influence. Of course he would have heard. Elara's hands started to shake. For a moment she was back in that cold conference room, him standing over her, his voice dripping with condescension. "You'll never make it, Elara." Ben found her staring at the phone, her face pale. "What is it?" She showed him the text. "That son of a bitch," Ben seethed. "He can't stand seeing you succeed. He has to try and poison it." Another text came through. "They're going to eat you alive. Isabella Hayes chews up naive idealists like you for breakfast. You don't belong in that room." "Don't listen to him," Ben said, his voice firm. "He's trying to get in your head. It's what he does. He's a parasite, and he's just realized his host is about to leave the planet." Elara took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Ben was right. This was a tactic, a deliberate psychological attack designed to make her falter at the most critical moment. She blocked the number and threw the phone onto the couch. "He's not going to win. He's not getting in my head." But the seed of doubt had been planted. What if Richard was right? What if she was just a naive idealist? She was a coder, a thinker, an inventor. She wasn't a ruthless CEO. She was about to walk into the Colosseum armed with a good idea while everyone else had a sword and shield. That night she couldn't sleep. The numbers and statistics she had memorized swam in her head, jumbled with Richard's cruel words. She found herself drifting back to the day he'd left, the finality of his laughter echoing in the sterile office. He had been so sure of her failure. His certainty was a heavy cloak threatening to smother the fire of her own conviction. Was he just a vindictive ex-husband, or did he see a fundamental truth about her that she refused to accept? The question haunted her through the long, dark hours before the most important day of her life. The Aethelred Corporation headquarters was a monument of glass and steel piercing the San Francisco skyline. It was designed to intimidate, to make visitors feel small and insignificant before they even reached the reception desk. Elara, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit Laura had insisted she buy, walked through the cavernous lobby, her heels clicking on the polished marble floor. Ben was beside her, carrying the encrypted laptop that held Athena's soul. They were escorted to the 50th floor to a waiting area with panoramic views of the bay. The silence was absolute, the air still and cool. Every detail, from the minimalist art on the walls to the ergonomic Scandinavian furniture, screamed money and power. A severe-looking woman with a tablet led them into the boardroom. It was even more intimidating than the lobby. A long, dark wood table was surrounded by 20 chairs. At the head of the table sat Isabella Hayes. She was smaller in person than Elara had imagined, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She didn't smile. She simply nodded, a gesture that was neither welcoming nor hostile. It was neutral, analytical. The rest of the board was composed of stone-faced men and women who looked like they had been carved from granite. "Ms. Vance," Isabella Hayes said, her voice crisp and clear, "you have 60 minutes. The floor is yours." Elara walked to the front of the room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She took a deep breath, pictured her son Leo's smiling face as he used Athena, and began. She didn't start with financials or market share. She started with a story. She spoke about the millions of kids left behind by a one-size-fits-all education system. She spoke of the frustration of parents who watched their bright children struggle. She spoke with a passion that was authentic and palpable. The board members who had been glancing at their tablets started to look up. They started to listen. Then Ben launched the demo. He projected Athena onto a massive screen. The interface was clean, intuitive, and beautiful. He ran a simulation showing how the AI adapted in real time to a user's inputs, shifting its teaching style, identifying a potential learning disability, and offering a new customized pathway to understanding. There were murmurs around the table. One of the board members, a man with a reputation for being a ruthless numbers guy, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. Elara then moved to the business plan, her voice confident and steady. She laid out their 5-year growth strategy, their monetization model, and their projected user acquisition costs. She knew her numbers inside and out. She had built this from nothing, and her command of the details was absolute. As she was wrapping up, a side door to the boardroom opened. An assistant leaned in and whispered something to Isabella Hayes. Hayes's expression remained unchanged, but she gave a curt nod. The door opened wider and a man walked in. Elara's blood turned to ice. It was Richard Sterling. He was dressed in one of his signature expensive suits, a charming, apologetic smile plastered on his face. "Isabella, my apologies for the interruption," he said, his voice oozing false sincerity. "My meeting on the 48th floor ran late. I just wanted to come by and offer some context." A cold dread washed over Elara. This wasn't a coincidence. A meeting on the 48th floor. He had engineered this. This was his masterstroke, his final public attempt to destroy her. Isabella Hayes looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Richard, we weren't aware you had an interest in this presentation." "Oh, absolutely," he said, walking casually toward the front of the room, positioning himself near Elara like a predator circling its prey. "Elara and I have a long history. I'm her ex-husband. I funded much of her early, shall we say, tinkering with this project." He was lying, painting himself as her benevolent benefactor. "I think she's done a wonderful job with her little hobby," he continued, addressing the board. "It's very sweet. But as a serious investment, I feel it's my duty as someone who cares for Elara's well-being to raise a few red flags." Ben stood up. "What are you doing, Richard?" Richard ignored him. "The core concept, while idealistic, lacks a scalable commercial application. The technology is derivative of existing platforms and, frankly, the leadership," he glanced at Elara with feigned sympathy, "lacks the necessary experience to navigate the competitive ed-tech landscape. I'm afraid this is more of a passion project than a viable enterprise." He was using his reputation, his perceived expertise, to poison the well. He was framing her as an inexperienced emotional amateur. It was the exact narrative he had whispered to her on the day of their divorce. The room was silent. The board members looked from Richard to Elara, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Richard had successfully sown chaos and doubt. He had hijacked her moment of triumph and turned it into a public humiliation. Isabella Hayes finally spoke, her voice dangerously quiet. "Mr. Sterling, you are not on the agenda. Your context is unsolicited." She then turned her piercing gaze to Elara. The entire deal, Elara's entire future, hung on her next words. "Ms. Vance," Hayes said, her eyes boring into her, You have heard Mr. Sterling's assessment. Please respond. This was the test. All the preparation, all the late nights, all the coding and strategizing, it had all come down to this moment. Her abuser was standing right next to her in front of the most powerful people in her industry, telling them she was a failure. She could crumble or she could fight. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to slow down. The air in the boardroom grew thick and heavy. Elara could feel the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on her, feel Richard's smug, triumphant presence beside her. His attack had been perfectly executed. He hadn't screamed or yelled. He had used the calm, rational language of a concerned investor, a tone designed to be credible to the people in this room. He had painted her as a flighty hobbyist and himself as the voice of reason. The anger she had felt on the day of the divorce, that cold, hard star of fury, reignited in her chest, burning away the fear. She looked not at Richard but directly at Isabella Hayes. "Thank you, Hayes," Elara said, her voice surprisingly calm and clear. She turned her body slightly, a subtle but deliberate act of putting Richard at her back out of her line of sight. "And thank you, Richard, for your assessment. It's a narrative I'm quite familiar with." She addressed the board. "Mr. Sterling is correct about one thing. We do have a long history. A history in which my tinkering, as he calls it, formed the foundational algorithms for his first and most successful venture capital fund, Sterling Analytics. The predictive models that made his reputation. They were born on my whiteboard in my study from my research." A ripple of surprise went through the room. Richard's face tightened, the charming smile faltering for a second. "He calls my leadership inexperienced," Elara continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "And it's true, I haven't spent the last decade in boardrooms. I've spent it in the trenches. I've been coding, researching, and building this technology from the ground up, line by line. I was raising 2 children while teaching myself the very machine learning principles that power Athena. I would argue that managing a household, a child with learning disabilities, and the development of a sophisticated AI platform requires a level of executive function that few CEOs possess." She took a step toward the center of the room, claiming the space. "And he calls my technology derivative. Mr. Sterling wouldn't know derivative code if it bought him a new sports car. Which I might add my work has done several times over. He is a salesman. A very, very good one. But he does not understand the technology. He never has." She gestured to the screen where Athena's elegant interface still glowed. "What you see here isn't just an app. It's a dynamic neuro-linguistic programming model that integrates emotional feedback. There is nothing else like it on the market. Ask Mr. Sterling to explain the back-end architecture. Ask him to detail the ethical subroutines I designed to protect student data. He can't, because he doesn't know." She finally turned to look at Richard. His face was pale, his composure cracking. He looked flustered, exposed. "You say this is a passion project," Elara said, her voice dropping, becoming intensely personal, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're damn right it is. It's born from the passion of watching my own son struggle. It's born from the passion of wanting to build something that helps people instead of just making rich men richer. But don't you dare mistake passion for a lack of commercial viability. The global edtech market is projected to be worth over $400 billion by 2026. A platform that can demonstrably improve learning outcomes for even a fraction of those students isn't a hobby. It's a unicorn." She turned back to Isabella Hayes. "Mr. Sterling is afraid. He's not afraid for me. He's not afraid for Aethelred's investment. He's afraid of me. He told me on the day our divorce was finalized that I would never make it without him, that I was nothing. His presence here today is not due diligence. It's a desperate, pathetic attempt to make his prediction come true." She stood there, her chest rising and falling, her statement hanging in the silent room. She had laid everything bare, the ugly history, the personal attacks, the professional condescension. She had taken his narrative and shattered it. Richard sputtered, "This is absurd. She's being emotional. This is a personal dispute. It has no place." "I agree," Isabella Hayes said, cutting him off. Her voice was like chipping ice. She stood up. "This has no place here." She looked at Richard, and for the first time her face showed a flicker of something other than neutrality. It was contempt. "Mr. Sterling, your reputation precedes you, both as a venture capitalist and more recently in other matters that have come to my attention. We have a strict policy against outside interference in our acquisition assessments. Your context has been noted and dismissed." She turned to her assistant. "Please show Mr. Sterling out. His business here and in this building is concluded." The color drained completely from Richard's face. To be so publicly, so coldly dismissed by Isabella Hayes was a death sentence in Silicon Valley. He opened his mouth to protest, but 2 security guards had materialized silently at the door. He was escorted out of the room, his face a mask of pure, impotent fury. The room was silent again. Elara stood there, shaking slightly from the adrenaline. She had faced her dragon and won. But she still didn't know if she had won the war. Isabella Hayes walked to the front of the room and stood before Elara. She examined her for a long moment, her gaze intense and searching. "Ms. Vance," she said finally, "that was quite a display. You have more of a killer instinct than your ex-husband gives you credit for." She glanced at the screen. "Now let's talk about valuation. My team has some concerns about your initial numbers. We think you're aiming too low." The rest of the meeting was a blur. Elara, running on pure adrenaline, answered a barrage of highly technical questions from the board. They picked at her code, questioned her security protocols, and stress-tested her financial models. With Ben at her side providing the granular detail, they met every challenge. The atmosphere had shifted. The board members were no longer skeptical observers. They were engaged, intrigued, and in some cases visibly excited. When they left the Aethelred building, the afternoon sun felt impossibly bright. Elara and Ben didn't speak as they walked to their car. They were both in a state of shock, suspended between the terror of the confrontation and the dizzying hope of what Isabella Hayes had implied. "Aiming too low," Ben finally said as they sat in the parked car, the engine off. "Did she really say we were aiming too low?" "I think so," Elara whispered, still trying to process it. Either that, or it was the most elaborate and cruel rejection in history. The drive back to her house was agonizingly quiet. They had done all they could. The decision was now out of their hands. They were told they would hear something within 24 hours. It felt like a lifetime. Elara spent the evening pacing her living room, unable to eat or sit still. Laura came over, and the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table, jumping every time a phone buzzed. Laura was ecstatic when she heard about how Elara had handled Richard. "You took back your power, Elara," she said, beaming. "No matter what happens with this deal, you won. You showed him, and more importantly, you showed yourself who you really are." Despite the praise, the doubt lingered. The corporate world was fickle. Maybe Richard's stunt, though it backfired in the room, would give the board pause. Maybe they'd see her as someone who came with drama. The next morning, Elara was awake before dawn, staring at her laptop, an untouched cup of coffee beside her. At 9:15 a.m., her phone rang. The caller ID read Aethelred Corp. Her breath caught in her throat. Ben and Laura, who had stayed the night on the couches, rushed to her side. She put the phone on speaker, her hand trembling so much she could barely press the button. "This is Elara Vance." "Ms. Vance, this is Isabella Hayes." The voice was as crisp and direct as ever. "I won't waste your time. The board convened this morning. We were unanimously impressed by your technology and by your fortitude. We are formally extending an offer to acquire Praxis AI." Elara's knees felt weak. She sank into her chair. "The offer," Hayes continued, "is for a controlling interest in the company, with you and your team remaining in place to run the Athena division under the Aethelred umbrella. The total valuation of the deal is $1 billion. Silence. Ben's jaw dropped. Laura covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with disbelief. Elara couldn't speak. $1 billion. The number was so vast, so astronomical, it didn't feel real. "Ms. Vance, are you there?" "Yes." Elara managed to squeak out, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'm here." "Good," said Ms. Hayes. "There is one more thing. Your ex-husband. I did not dismiss him yesterday simply to defend your honor, though I did find his behavior reprehensible. For the past 6 months, Aethelred's corporate security has been assisting a federal investigation into securities fraud. The primary target is a group of VCs engaged in a pump-and-dump scheme involving tech IPOs. The lead target of that investigation is Richard Sterling." The room spun. "His attempt to sabotage your presentation was an act of desperation," Hayes explained. "He likely assumed if you secured a major deal, your newfound credibility might bring scrutiny to his own business practices, especially regarding the origins of his foundational technology. He was trying to silence you permanently. His little stunt yesterday just confirmed our profile of him." As Hayes was speaking, Ben's laptop, which was open to a financial news site, began flashing with a breaking news alert. "Breaking SEC raids. Sterling Analytics offices in Manhattan. Founder Richard Sterling taken into custody." The headline was stark, brutal, and final. There was a picture of Richard, his perfect suit, rumpled, his face ashen, being led out of his gleaming office building in handcuffs. The Midas touch had worn off. The Titan had fallen. It all clicked into place. Richard's increasing paranoia, his desperate need to see her fail, it wasn't just about his ego. It was about survival. Her success was a direct threat to his house of cards. Elara hung up the phone. The tears of joy mingled with tears of shock. The man who had told her she would be nothing in a year had lost everything in a single day. His prediction had come true, but in a way he could never have fathomed. It was not her who was broke and alone. It was him. The contract would be signed the next day. The very day her year of failure was supposed to begin. The signing ceremony was not held in a cold, sterile conference room. At Elara's request, it took place at a local school in a low-income district, one that had agreed to be a pilot for the Athena platform. The press was there, but the real audience was a room full of children, teachers, and parents. Elara stood at the podium not in a power suit, but in a simple, elegant dress. She looked out at the faces of the children and saw the future. When she signed the contract opposite Isabella Hayes, the flashbulbs of the cameras were a distant pop. The real light for her was the look of hope in the eyes of a young girl in the front row who, like her own son, struggled to read. After the official ceremony, Isabella Hayes stood with Elara by a window overlooking the schoolyard. "I never told you why I was so interested in Athena," Hayes said quietly, her formal demeanor softening for the first time. "I grew up like these kids. Poor. Overlooked. I had a severe processing disorder that went undiagnosed. Teachers called me slow. It wasn't until a single librarian took an interest in me, found a way to teach me visually, that I unlocked my potential." She looked at Elara. "You didn't just build a piece of software, Ms. Vance. You built 1,000 librarians. You built a tool that tells every child they're worth the effort. That's not something you can put a price on, but $1 billion is a good start." As Elara was leaving, a familiar figure was waiting for her on the sidewalk past the security line. It was Richard. He was out on bail, looking like a ghost of his former self. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were hollow, and the arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate, haunted look. "Elara," he said, his voice raspy. I saw the news. Congratulations." She stopped, looking at him, not with hatred, but with a profound and weary pity. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a small, broken man. "I need your help," he pleaded. "They're going to take everything. You could talk to them, tell them about the early days, that the ideas were yours. Maybe they'd be lenient if—" "No, Richard," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I can't help you." "But why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "After everything—" "Because of everything," she replied. "My story isn't about you anymore, Richard. It's not about revenge, and it's not about the past. It's about them." She nodded toward the school. "My work is just beginning, and you have to face the consequences of your own choices. Goodbye." She walked away without looking back, getting into the modest Subaru that now felt more valuable to her than any luxury car. She wasn't Mrs. Vance, the socialite wife. She wasn't Elara, the scorned ex. She was Elara Vance, founder of Praxis AI, creator of Athena, and the architect of her own destiny. Richard had given her 1 year to fail. She had taken 1 day to build a legacy. And as she drove toward the horizon, she knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. 6 months had passed since the day the world turned on its axis. The makeshift headquarters in Elara's suburban house was now a quiet, lived-in home again. The hum of servers had been replaced by the sound of her children's laughter. The new headquarters for the Athena division of Aethelred was a testament to the magnitude of her new reality. It occupied 3 full floors of a gleaming new tower in San Francisco, a cathedral of brushed steel, smart glass, and open-concept collaboration spaces. Elara walked through the bustling office, no longer the scrappy startup founder, but the president of a division with a 9-figure budget and over 200 employees. She knew most of them by name. She had insisted on being part of the hiring process, building a team that shared her passion not just for technology, but for the mission behind it. Ben Carter, now her CTO, with a perpetually bewildered smile and a corner office he rarely used, was leading a team of the brightest minds in AI. Laura Simmons had been brought on as chief counsel, her bulldog tenacity now protecting Athena from corporate predators instead of a single manipulative ex-husband. On the surface, everything was perfect. The pilot programs in schools were a resounding success. Early data showed a 30% improvement in learning outcomes for students using the platform. A major tech magazine had just run a cover story on her, a glossy, flattering profile with the headline, "The Architect: How Elara Vance Built Tomorrow's Classroom." Yet a subtle disquiet hummed beneath the surface of her new life. It was an echo, the lingering resonance of the battle she had fought, reminding her that victory was not an event, but a process. The first tremor came from the very magazine article meant to celebrate her. While the piece was positive, the journalist had woven the story of her divorce throughout the narrative. They called her success the ultimate revenge, framing her motivation as a response to Richard rather than a passion for her work. It subtly diminished her agency, painting her as a woman scorned who struck it rich, rather than a brilliant innovator who was always destined for greatness. It was a narrative she couldn't control, and it stung. The second tremor came from within Aethelred itself. While Isabella Hayes was her steadfast champion, a trillion-dollar corporation was an ecosystem of competing ambitions. Julian Croft, the executive VP of the Enterprise Solutions Division, was a corporate lifer who saw Athena as a flashy, resource-draining pet project. He was a master of the backhanded compliment and the skeptical question cloaked as due diligence. In a quarterly budget meeting, he challenged her request for funding an ambitious global expansion. "The numbers from the pilot program are charming, Elara," he said, the use of her first name in the formal setting a deliberate power play. "But we're talking about an immense capital outlay for a project that serves the public sector. Its path to profitability is, shall we say, more philanthropic than strategic. Are we sure we aren't letting a compelling narrative get in the way of sound fiscal judgment?" It was Richard's condescension in a $1,000 suit. He wasn't calling her work a little hobby, but the implication was the same. It was soft idealistic and not the work of a serious business person. The old anger flared, but she had learned. She didn't let it show. "Thank you for the question, Julian," she responded, her tone even and cool. "What you call a philanthropic path is actually a path to market dominance. We are building a foundational relationship with the next generation of users. The data we are ethically gathering on learning patterns is the most valuable educational data set in the world. The long-term enterprise applications from corporate training to continuing medical education are exponential. We aren't just building a product. We are building the entire ecosystem. This isn't charity. It's a long-term investment that will dwarf the revenue from your legacy enterprise clients within a decade." She won the room and she got her budget. But she walked out knowing she had a new kind of fight on her hands, a political one fought with spreadsheets and projections instead of raw passion. The deepest tremor, however, came that evening. She was helping her son Leo with his homework. He was excelling using a consumer version of Athena to help him navigate his dyslexia. He was happy, more confident than she had ever seen him. "Mom?" he asked suddenly, looking up from his tablet. "A kid at school, Jason. He said you became super rich because Dad was a bad guy and went to jail. He said you were getting revenge. Is that true?" Elara's heart seized. The glossy magazine article, the corporate battles, they were abstract. This was real. This was the echo of her past creeping into her children's lives. She knelt down in front of him, taking his hands. "Your dad made some very bad choices in his business, and he is facing the consequences for them. That's a separate thing," she said carefully. "But Athena, I built Athena for you, Leo. I started it long ago because I saw how smart and brilliant you were, and I wanted to build a tool that could help the world see it too. My success didn't come from your dad's failure. It came from my love for you." He seemed to accept that, but the conversation left her shaken. Her victory wasn't a clean, happy ending. It was a complex, messy reality that her children would have to navigate alongside her. The final echo arrived the next day via a phone call from Laura. "I've just had a call from the U.S. Attorney's Office," Laura said, her voice all business. "They're preparing for Richard's trial. His lawyers are trying to paint him as a visionary who was betrayed by his partners. The prosecution wants to establish a pattern of unethical behavior. They want to talk to you, Elara. They want you to testify about how he stole your intellectual property for Sterling Analytics." Elara closed her eyes. She was being pulled back into the one place she never wanted to visit again. Testifying would mean sitting in a courtroom under oath and recounting the most painful years of her life in public detail by excruciating detail. It would give men like Julian Croft more ammunition and the media a fresh new angle for their woman-scorned narrative. It would be a distraction from her mission, from the future she was trying to build. But if she refused, Richard might get a lighter sentence. His lawyers might succeed in rewriting history, recasting him as a tragic hero. Justice would not be fully served. She stood in her vast, beautiful office, the symbol of everything she had won, and felt the walls closing in. She looked out at the city skyline, a landscape of infinite possibility that now seemed fraught with invisible tripwires. She had defeated her tyrant, but she now understood that his ghost would linger. Her greatest challenge was no longer about proving him wrong. It was about proving to herself and to the world that she could build a legacy so bright that it would finally once and for all cast out the last of his shadows. Elara Vance's story isn't just about a billion-dollar contract. It's about the incredible power of resilience and the quiet, unshakable strength of a person who refuses to let someone else write their ending. It's a reminder that your worth is never determined by the opinions of those who try to tear you down. The world is full of Richards who will tell you that you are nothing without them, that your dreams are just little hobbies. But it's also full of Elara's people with brilliant ideas burning inside them, just waiting for the freedom to build. Her triumph wasn't just signing a piece of paper. It was reclaiming her own narrative. So what is the lesson here? Never ever let anyone else hold the pen to your life story. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories of incredible triumph over adversity. Let us know in the comments below who is the Ben or Laura in your life who has always believed in you. We can't wait to hear from you.